This is Rumble, and I'm Michael Moore, and I'm very lucky to have as my guest on today's show the representative from the 5th District of the state of Minnesota in our United States Congress. She became one of the first 2 Muslim women ever to be elected to the United States Congress in 2018, and I think she's in between votes here, so we're very lucky to able to have this time, and also so much going on right now. Please welcome to Rumble Representative Ilhan Omar. How are you?
Well, great to be here, Michael. This is really exciting.
Let me first of all start before we get into politics and what's going on in Minneapolis and everything. Your father passed away just a couple of weeks ago. So first of all, my condolences, and I hope you and your family are doing okay. He passed away at the age, I believe, of 67 years old, and the cause of death was complications of COVID-19. So this is doubly despairing in terms of that he had to leave us before his time because of this pandemic that we're in the middle of. Yeah. How are you doing?
Thank you for your condolences. It's been a challenge to coming to terms with the fact that he's taken from us. You know, my father was a fighter, and for me, it sort of puts an exclamation point on just how dangerous this virus is, and how many people's lives are being stolen by it, and how seriously we need to take it in not just urging people to wear masks, but testing and tracing. My father was an avid mask wearer. And he was quite frustrated at times when he would briefly step out, that he would encounter people without a mask, and it's a reminder that we don't wear the mask for ourselves. We wear it for the protection of others as well. Mm-hmm. And so when others wear it, then they're protecting us. And so it's a reciprocal thing that we do as a community to keep each other safe. And I just know that the people he came into contact with, if they were wearing a mask, that his life would have been saved, and he would have still been here with us. And so I just hope that people take that seriously, and our leaders continue to urge people to take it seriously and wear masks themselves as well.
Well, I'm really, really sorry that this happened to him, to you, to your family. From what I know of you, and of course we've met and spoken before, your mother, I believe, died when you were very young.
Yeah, he was mostly my mother and father, and so this is a real loss, very hard one.
You were born in Somalia, but when you were 8 years old, due to the fighting and everything going on there, you became refugees, and you lived at 8 years old. You went to Kenya, you and your father and other family members, and lived in a refugee camp there for 4 years before being able to come to the United States. And you ended up in Minneapolis, and that whole journey from the time of your mother's death when you were 2, through being a refugee to coming to the United States. Those of us who were born here can only imagine. We've heard the stories of our grandparents or great grandparents or whatever, and what they had to go through to come here and then survive here and all that. But I can, like I said, I can only imagine what this has all meant to you and what you've been through, and then how much your father meant to you through all of this. So, thank you for coming to the United States.
Thank you. Thanks to the United States for having me, and for allowing me the opportunity really to find a new home and to thrive.
Yeah, the rest of us had no choice. We were just born here. Like nobody asked us if we wanted to be Americans. It just
that's actually a really good one. A friend recently said, it's kind of funny that everybody questions the Americanness of a lot of immigrants and refugees in this country. They swear allegiance and are actively choosing to be an American and to be part of our country more than anyone else is. And so, this is it's our chosen home. It's, you can think of yourself as a guest when you are an immigrant, like you would be to a new home, to a place that you're visiting, or you can think of yourself as someone who's staying, and and the difference between that is, when a guest visits your home, they expect you to do everything for them and to cater to them, and when they are now going to be living in that same space, you also expect them to do their fair share, and that's what we do actively when we get involved in organizing and legislating and being part of the American fabric and progress is doing our part in creating that more perfect union.
Which brings us to Minneapolis. You represent the city of Minneapolis. I believe your district covers the entire city. And to be honest, I don't think most people listening to this would have ever thought or assumed that a revolution would begin in, of all places, Minneapolis. No offense to Minneapolis. It's I think one of our best cities in the country, and I've always enjoyed my time there in both St. Paul and Minneapolis. And
we say no one thought except Prince.
Except Prince, yes, yes.
I think as a Minneapolis native, he had a vision of that being possible, that the revolution would begin in Minneapolis.
Yes, that's so true. And look at what Minnesota has. Minnesota's given us. Prince gave us Bob Dylan, the Coen brothers in film. So many great artists. I believe F. Scott Fitzgerald was born in Minnesota. So yes, so much good, so much creativity and art and thinking and politics. Even the Democratic Party in Minnesota isn't called the Democratic Party. It's
Democratic Farmer Labor.
Yes. So like you put it right in the title. Yes, we're for the laborers and we're for the farmers. So we've all had these good feelings about Minneapolis and Minnesota for, certainly in my lifetime. Nonetheless, a lynching took place in your district, in that corner in front of Cup Foods that you represent, by the Minneapolis police. And this is not the first endeavor by the Minneapolis police to kill innocent Black people in Minneapolis. And, we don't generally think, being from Detroit and Flint, you don't think of Minneapolis as a Black city the way you would Atlanta or, places like that. But in the last few years, one after another, the abuse toward Black citizens by the Minneapolis police, well, it ignited a movement, and more than a movement. This has been profound in terms of how the country seems to have risen up, and all kinds of people, all races and age groups and genders, and it's as sad as this moment is, and as tragic as it has been for George Floyd's family, and before him the Castile family and the Clark family and the others essentially murdered by the Minneapolis police. There's been something out of this that has, I think, started to transform us. I hope I'm not just trying to grasp onto some false optimism, but you're the representative in our United States Congress for the epicenter of this revolution, I'll call it. I just want to hear what you're going through and what you're thinking and what, because I've been watching you and listening to you here the last month or so, and your leadership has been inspiring. And I'd just like you to share that with our listeners here on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I think oftentimes people think about, a lot of the systematic racism in our country to be centered in places like the South, and and places where there is a heavy Black population, and we don't often think about the Great North having some racial tensions, and it's been the case that Minneapolis has one of the worst racial disparity gaps for our country. And Minneapolis, as progressive and as liberal and as forward thinking as we have been, have not had the kind of transformative change that would allow us to rid ourselves of these systematic ills that continue to devastate our communities. I mean, I remember the first, everybody in Minneapolis has a story of the first police brutality they've witnessed, the first police lynching, the first police, mass murder. And there is a shared camaraderie in the communities of color, in that, in knowing that these are not just stories people tell us; these are things that we ourselves have witnessed once or twice or multiple times. And so the first killing of an innocent person that I witnessed was nearly 20 years ago, of a young man. His name was Abu Jailani, and he was gunned down on Franklin and Chicago, having just left a mental health institution where he was hospitalized, and was a father, and was awaiting just actually the arrival of his son, who's now 18. And I remember I was standing in that corner, as were many other people, as the police, try to get this man to comprehend what they were saying. He didn't speak English. And obviously he was having, a mental health crisis, and there was no attempt really to try to even understand that these could be some of the problems that are leading to him not following police commands. And so they unloaded nearly 30 bullets into his body within minutes of that interaction. And then you have the Jamar Clark case, and other multiple others that have outraged the community, and we have over the years turned our anger, our pain, and frustration into asking for change and reforming the system to be a more equitable one. But when you have systems that are entrenched in systematic oppression and injustice, reforms around the edge that barely scratch the surface are not going to create the kind of positive outcome that you ultimately want in keeping everyone safe and wanting people to have full liberation and access to their constitutionally mandated right to life and liberty. And so Minneapolis is one of those rare cities that has duty to intervene as a policy for their police officers. And then you have the case with George Floyd, where 3 police officers failed to intervene in the killing of an innocent man who was no threat to the police or to the public for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And even the officer who took his life failed even at that duty to intervene, as he'd asked and begged for his life to be saved. And so, we I think for now understand that reforms in the way in which we used to think about them are no longer going to save lives in our city, and they are not going to save our communities, and they are not going to save our nation. And so there are many municipalities around the country that have police departments that need a little push in order to do better. But the Minneapolis Police Department, in my belief, isn't one of those. And so it is going to be really important for us to gut it and figure out how to rebuild a new policy and standard that will keep all of us safe, and will attend to the needs of the community when there is someone who's having a mental health crisis, when there is someone who is dealing with a substance abuse that risks their lives in the community, when we have, someone who just needs an extra support. And the way in which our system is set up right now isn't serving us, because we have paid so much money into a punitive system, and we have neglected to socially and economically care for the people in our community, and providing adequate education and healthcare and housing and mental health support and substance abuse support, in dealing with youth violence, and neglect. And so this is really a reckoning that we are having with the system as a community that does resonate with the rest of the country, because there is a mirroring community in every corner of the country, and that's why you see protests for the first time happening in all 50 states and across the country. I mean, across the world. And so you know that the issues that we have in Minneapolis are relatable, are understandable.
Yes.
And are translatable for everyone, regardless of where they live and what background they have. And that, I think, is when you understand that this movement is going to lead us to a moment of real transformative change, not just for our community, but for the country and the world.
These protests have happened in the smallest towns across this country. You say that the current police department in Minneapolis needs to be gutted. And that's a tough word. But the city council agrees with you. It seems like most decent people agree with this. Can Minneapolis create a different idea, as you've been describing, of how, if we were to deal with public safety, if we were to think of it in a different way, can Minneapolis perhaps become the example of that other communities can follow? Do you think Minneapolis can pull this off? It seems like a tall order, but it also seems like there's no place else to go but to make these changes, to do the gutting.
I believe so. I believe in our community. I believe in our ability to build systems that work for all of us. What I also know is that people in the community are finally understanding many of the failures that the department has, um, and the ways in which it hasn't really lived up to performing its core functions. So Minneapolis Police Department fails to solve half of the homicide crimes in the city. We have had rape kits disappeared or destroyed. We have had, multiple um, police officers who, are accused of misuse of their powers, and the city and its citizens pay out millions of dollars every year to citizens who have been violated um, by the Minneapolis Police Department. And so when you think about how much money we are already spending in just the policing function that is not working, how much money we are spending in covering the citizens that have been harmed by the Minneapolis Police Department, and you think about the ways in which their credibility is not believed uh, uh, in the community, and the way in which so many other institutions within the community have lost trust, and got rid of the relationship that they have with the Minneapolis Police Department. It doesn't make any sense for the citizens of our city to be forced to continue to carry out this relationship. Almost every single other institution and corporation and entity has decided to end the relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, and the city council is just following through in ending the relationship
Yeah,
the city has with it as well.
I can understand that because I don't know how do you call it a police department? I didn't realize that half the homicides that happen in Minneapolis are not solved by the police. That's such an incredible statistic that it how do they even call themselves a police if they can't do the very basic thing of solving half the homicides,
Mhm.
or treating rape like it's not important, and just destroy rape kits, and this is, I want to believe, Congresswoman Omar, I want to believe that we're going to come out of this not just with better policing and a different way to look at public safety, but can this uprising result in other changes, basic changes that we need, that took, because to you and I think this is all bundled in together in terms of the lack of health care, housing, education, all these things. You've been a big supporter for a long time of ending student debt, canceling it, not having young people go into such debt just because they want to go to college. I mean, all these things. Is it too much to ask? Are we? I've mentioned on this podcast before. Are we just too overwhelmed, or are we capable right now to let's come out of this pandemic? Let's post Minneapolis. Let's come out of this with some of the things that we all need. Am I up in the sky with some pie, or is this something that you have some belief in that we could do this?
I do. I'm always the optimist in the room. So I believe that our voices in the streets and our votes in the ballot box can produce those things if we actively join them, and recognize the importance of both equally. What I am seeing today in the changes that are being proposed, just because of the sheer number of people that are out in the streets pressuring the system makes me very optimistic about what's possible. And I say that because, again, as someone who, grew up in Minneapolis and had been organizing since, I was 14 around systematic change there, I know that every single time the people recognize their voice in the street needs to lead to creating pressure points for those that are in power, we have been able to have some change. And now what we are seeing is that people actually are very clear in the kind of change they want to see. And so, you don't just have people saying, we want our elected officials to act, or we want, corporations to invest in our communities. People are actually saying, I want you to make this particular investment, right? Like, I want you to create this particular policy. And so the calls that are happening right now are not just dealing with police brutality and systematic racism. They are dealing with the social and economic neglect many of our communities have faced for so long.
Right.
And so in the calls that are being pushed in the streets have been about investment in education, investment in healthcare, investment in, having justice within our criminal justice system, investment in de-incarceration and the funding of our police and our, military, and reinvesting and creating budgets that actually translate to economic and social investment for us. You can clearly see that there are very straightforward, strategic people who are leading the movement, even though they are very young, very Black, very feminine, very queer. They are very honest about what they want to see. And so their calls really are not in platitudes. Their calls are not theoretical. Their calls are pointy, and I believe because of that, we are going to get to where we need to get. For so long, I mean, people would say, people come out to the streets and you really don't know what they want. Why don't they just say what they want? And you have people who are saying, I want you to spend 90%, 99% of the budget in caring for the people who actually are part of the community that need that investment. Those are our children. That is, our elderly. Those are, families who are struggling. And so having an economy that works for all of us, having a healthcare system that provides free healthcare to all of us, having housing for all of us, like those are part of the policies that are being articulated and talked about by organizers, which I think is a step in the right direction. And our response as legislators has been to legislate our pain and our anguish and trauma into something positive that's about hope and wealth building and transformative for all of our community.
I know you got a vote that you have to get to, and I just wanted to ask you one last question, just on an international issue. If we could just switch channels just for a second. The Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, last month just announced that they were going to unilaterally annex more of the West Bank, just literally without any legal considerations, just take more land from Palestinians. And there has been in the last week or so quite an outcry around the world against this. And he said he was going to do it July 1st. And July 1st has come. And now he's saying he's going to have to, he wants to think about it just a little bit more, probably just waiting for things to calm down. But you and a dozen or so, I think, other members of Congress have signed a letter stating that the United States gives almost $4 billion a year of aid, mostly military aid, to Israel. That you can no longer steal people's land, and if you're going to do that, then we, the United States, are going to have to condition this money based on your behavior. First of all, this is something that never would have happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The fact that there's a dozen members of Congress willing to say that, to go publicly on the record and say that, and take whatever abuse you're going to have to take. But just if you could just, in our closing moments here, just explain to people listening to this why this is an important issue, and why we as Americans, even though we've got all this other stuff we're facing right now, why we should care about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the responsibility of all of us to oppose systematic injustices here and abroad, and more so the responsibility of Congress. What you just mentioned, unilateral annexation is a violation of international law. It's a violation of Palestinian human rights, and it's a direct counter to American values of democracy and self-determination. And I think it's really important for us to remember that when we say we want to lead, we have to lead with our values, and this stands in the face of that. But also in leading in a collaborative effort when we have been for the right of Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side in peace, then we have to include the voices of Palestinians who oppose the annexation of their land. And for me, seeing justice-oriented members of Congress has been a really important thing. And I think for the first time, the people who march in the streets against injustices can see there's a direct linkage to the kind of people that you sent to Congress, who will not only stand up against oppressive systems here, but oppressive systems around the world, because the injustices we allow here translate something to people across the country. And it's important that we have that sort of intersectional lens in thinking about ourselves as it relates to what's happening around the world. But with that, I really do appreciate chatting with you. Again, hello to your listeners. We're gonna go and vote, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Congresswoman Omar from Minneapolis. Thank you for being on Rumble, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, all right. Be well and be safe. And I want to add to that I personally honor her father for what he did, both in saving her life and other members of the family in Somalia, and the struggle of being a refugee, of coming to this country. The fact that he would have to leave us because of this pandemic is obviously very sad, but also an outrage. I also want to, we began our discussion talking about being an immigrant and the other immigrants who come here, choose to come here. There was a Gallup poll just out recently that said for the first time ever, the majority of American people not only were supportive of immigrants and immigration, they wanted more of it. And it was actually a record number of Americans in this Gallup poll. I'll post it on the podcast site here on the page so you can read the article. that is really, that speaks so well to what I think the majority of the people in this country, where they are at in their hearts, in their souls, in their conscience, that a record number of them would not only say that they thought immigrants or immigration was a good idea, but that they wanted more of it. That is a turn. That is a turn. It's a turn that should have happened a long time ago, considering most of us, other than African Americans and Native people, all the rest of us and our ancestors, our grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, came from someplace else. Came by choice, not necessarily the kind of choice that we think of as today. Many of them were poor. Many of them were escaping various forms of persecution and saw the New World as a haven that maybe they could live and be free. And it's been forgotten over the years just how many of us, none of us, would be here if it weren't for that. Of course, Black Americans are, unless they've immigrated here from other places, are the descendants of slaves, and our Native peoples are the descendants of the survivors of a mass extinction, a mass genocide. As I've said I first wrote this 25 years ago in my first book, where I wrote about the fact that we have these two original sins, that we were founded in genocide and built on the backs of slaves. So I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by things like this, that the majority of our fellow Americans believe differently now. And that's thanks in large part to young people, young adults. The average age of this country now, I think, is 37 years old. So thank you to the younger people. There's also I want to mention the squad, as they're called in Congress, the four first-term women in the United States Congress who were elected in 2018, all women of color: Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Lana Presley, and who we were just speaking to, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from Minneapolis. So they've got this nickname, the Squad, and they've now started a couple days ago what's called the Squad Victory Fund. And you, people, the public, myself, can donate to this to support not just their reelection, but they're going to actually help get other progressives elected here in November. So check this out. I'll have a link or something here on my podcast page that you can go to. I'm going to contribute to it. I encourage you to do such if you are so inclined. I think that's a real good idea. Well, this has been I've enjoyed this podcast here with Ilhan Omar. I've known her now for a couple of years, and she's just a wonderful human being, full of kindness and goodness and compassion. And she's not afraid to speak her mind. Minneapolis is very, very lucky to have her at this moment, especially. And we're all very lucky to have her and the other women of the Squad in our United States Congress. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. Thank you to my executive producer of Rumble, Basil Hamden, our editor and sound engineer, Nick Quaz, all the other people who've been supportive and helpful with this podcast, and to all of you, the listeners, for being part of this, having surpassed 12 million listeners. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy your 4th of July weekend. The Canadians already had theirs. Theirs is July 1st. I constantly have asked them, how can you have your 4th of July on the 1st of July. It's called the 4th of July. I don't understand. But I hope all of you do enjoy. Please be safe. Please, 2 weeks from now, we don't want this pandemic to even be worse than what Dr. Fauci is already warning us. We're going to be at 100,000 new cases every single day. So please be safe, be careful, but enjoy your family, yourself, your friends in whatever safe way that you can. Be well. This is Rumble, and I'm Michael Moore.
We're gonna see, no, another bloody day.